You know that feeling you get just before you go to bed, when the house is quiet and the world outside your window seems to hold its breath? Maybe you check the locks one more time, just to be sure. Maybe you tell yourself it's just a habit, nothing more. But deep down, you know it's not just about safety. It's about something older, something primal, a sense that if you let your guard down, something might slip in. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 5 stories that will make you want to check those locks again. Stories that start with ordinary nights and end with doors you wish you'd never opened. Stories that might just make you wonder what's waiting on the other side. The first story comes from a small town in the Midwest, the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and everyone knows their neighbors. Or at least they think they do. It's called The Man in the Hallway. It started with a sound. Not a loud crash or a scream, but something softer, a gentle creak, like a floorboard settling under someone's weight. Emily, a college student home for the summer, was lying in bed scrolling through her phone. She'd always been a little anxious at night, but her parents' house felt safe, familiar. She told herself it was nothing, just the house cooling down after a hot day. But then she heard it again. This time it was closer. A slow, deliberate step in the hallway outside her room. She sat up, heart pounding. The hallway was dark, but she could see the faint outline of the door frame, the sliver of light from the bathroom nightlight. She listened, holding her breath. Another step. Then another. She texted her mom, who was asleep in the room down the hall. "Are you up?" No reply. She waited, staring at the door, every muscle tense. The footsteps stopped right outside her room. She wanted to call out, but her voice caught in her throat. Instead, she reached for the baseball bat she kept under her bed, a leftover from her high school days. She gripped it tightly, willing herself to move, to do something. But the door didn't open. The footsteps didn't move. They just waited. After what felt like hours, she finally heard her mom's voice, muffled and sleepy. "Emily, are you okay?" The footsteps vanished. Emily jumped up, flung open the door, and ran to her mom's room. Her mom swore she hadn't left her bed all night. The next morning, they checked the house. Every door was locked. Every window was shut. There were no signs of forced entry, no muddy footprints, nothing out of place. But Emily never forgot the feeling of someone standing just outside her door, waiting for her to make a sound. The second story is called The Visitor. It happened to a man named Mark, who lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of the city. Mark was a night owl, often staying up late to work on his computer. One night, around 2 a.m., he heard a soft knock at his door. Not the kind of knock you'd expect from a neighbor or a friend. This was slow, almost hesitant, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they wanted to be there. Mark ignored it at first, thinking it was just someone at the wrong door. But the knocking continued, growing more insistent. He got up, peered through the peephole, and saw nothing. The hallway was empty. He shrugged, went back to his desk, and tried to focus on his work. But the knocking started again, this time louder. He checked the peephole again, still nothing. He decided to open the door, just a crack, to see if anyone was there. The hallway was empty, but as he closed the door, he heard a whisper, so faint he almost missed it. "Let me in." Mark froze. He looked through the peephole one more time, and this time he saw a shadow at the far end of the hall. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching. Mark locked the door, double-checked the windows, and tried to convince himself it was just his imagination. But every night after that, at exactly 2 a.m., the knocking returned. Sometimes it was soft, sometimes frantic. Sometimes he heard the whisper, sometimes just silence. He started sleeping with the lights on, a chair wedged under the doorknob. Eventually, he moved out, leaving the apartment behind. But sometimes, late at night, he still hears that knock in his dreams. The third story is called The Locked Room. It's about a woman named Sarah, who moved into an old house with her husband and young daughter. The house was charming, with creaky floors and stained glass windows, but there was one room they never used, a small, windowless space at the end of the hall. The door was always locked, and the previous owner had warned them not to open it. "It's just storage," he'd said, "but it's best left alone." Sarah was curious, of course. She tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She asked her husband if he had the key, but he didn't. They decided to leave it alone, figuring it was just an old house quirk. But then, strange things started happening. They'd hear scratching sounds coming from behind the door, soft at first, then louder. Sometimes, late at night, they'd hear a voice whispering their names. One night, Sarah woke to find her daughter standing at the end of the hall, staring at the locked door. "She wants to come out," her daughter whispered. Sarah scooped her up, carried her back to bed, and tried to forget about it. But the next morning the door was ajar, just a crack. Inside, there was nothing but dust and shadows. But Sarah swore she saw something move in the darkness, something that didn't belong. The fourth story is called The Watcher at the Window. It happened to a couple, Jamie and Alex, who had just moved into a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Their new house was surrounded by tall trees, the kind that cast long shadows across the yard at night. The first few weeks were peaceful, filled with unpacking boxes and getting to know their neighbors. But then, one night, Jamie woke up to a strange feeling, a prickling at the back of her neck, as if someone was watching her. She rolled over and glanced at the window. At first, she thought it was just the moonlight playing tricks on her eyes. But then she saw it. A pale face, pressed against the glass, eyes wide and unblinking. She screamed, waking Alex, who jumped out of bed and rushed to the window. By the time he got there, the face was gone. They called the police, who searched the yard but found nothing, no footprints, no signs of anyone having been there. The next night it happened again. This time, Alex saw it too, a face, impossibly still, staring in at them from the darkness. They installed motion lights, locked every door and window, even put up security cameras. But the cameras never caught anything. The lights never turned on. And yet, every night the face returned, always at the same window, always watching. They tried everything, curtains, blinds, even moving their bed to the other side of the room. But no matter what they did, the face found them. It never tried to get in, never made a sound. It just watched. Eventually, they couldn't take it anymore. They sold the house and moved far away, but sometimes late at night, Jamie swears she can still feel those eyes on her, watching from the shadows. The fifth and final story is called The Locked Door. It's about a man named David who lived in an old apartment building downtown. The building was full of strange noises, pipes rattling, floors creaking, neighbors arguing through thin walls. But there was one sound that always made David uneasy, the sound of someone trying his doorknob late at night. At first, he thought it was just a drunk neighbor, someone who'd gotten the wrong door. But it kept happening night after night. Sometimes it was a gentle rattle, sometimes a violent shake. He started keeping a chair wedged under the handle just in case. One night he heard the sound again, louder than ever. He crept to the door, peered through the peephole, and saw a figure standing in the hallway. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothes, face hidden in shadow. David called out, "Who's there?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it leaned closer to the door, pressing its ear against the wood. David could hear it breathing, slow and steady. He backed away, heart pounding, and called the police. By the time they arrived, the hallway was empty. But the next morning, David found a note slipped under his door. It read, "You forgot to lock up." After that, David never forgot to lock his door. But the rattling never stopped. Sometimes he'd wake up to find the chair moved, the lock undone, the door standing open just a crack. He started sleeping with a knife under his pillow, but it didn't help. The figure kept coming back, night after night, always trying the handle, always waiting for him to forget. These 5 stories are more than just tales to scare you before bed. They're reminders of how thin the line is between safety and fear, between the familiar and the unknown. They're about the things that wait for us in the dark, just outside the circle of light we call home. And they're about the doors we lock, not just to keep the world out, but to keep something else from getting in. But what is it about these stories that gets under our skin? Why do we feel that chill when we hear footsteps in the hallway, or see a face at the window, or hear a knock at the door in the middle of the night? Maybe it's because these stories tap into something deep and ancient, a fear that's been with us since the first humans huddled around a fire, listening to the sounds of the night. It's the fear of the unknown, the fear that something is out there, watching, waiting, just beyond the edge of the light. It's the fear that no matter how many locks we turn, no matter how many times we check the windows, we're never really safe. Because sometimes the things we're afraid of aren't just stories. Sometimes they're real, and sometimes they're already inside. But maybe There's more to it than that. Maybe these stories are warnings, passed down from generation to generation, reminding us to be careful, to pay attention, to trust our instincts. Maybe they're a way of teaching us to respect the boundaries between ourselves and the unknown, to remember that not everything that knocks on our door is meant to be let in. Or maybe, just maybe, they're invitations. Invitations to look a little closer, to listen a little harder, to question the things we take for granted. Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones that happen to other people. They're the ones that could happen to us. So tonight, before you go to bed, check your locks. Close your windows. Draw the curtains. And remember, sometimes the only thing standing between you and the darkness is a thin piece of wood and a simple turn of the key. But if you hear footsteps in the hallway, or see a face at the window, or hear a knock at the door when you're sure you're alone, don't ignore it. Don't brush it off as just your imagination, because sometimes the things we're afraid of are closer than we think. You might be wondering why these stories linger in your mind long after the lights are out. Why, even when you know they're just stories, you find yourself glancing at the window, listening for the faintest sound in the hallway, or double-checking the lock on your door. It's because these stories are built on the ordinary. They don't start with monsters or haunted houses. They start with the familiar. A quiet home, a late-night walk, a knock at the door. They take the things we trust, the places we feel safest, and twist them, just enough to make us question what we know. Take Emily's story, for example. The man in the hallway didn't break in, didn't shatter a window or force a door. He was just there, waiting. The terror wasn't in what he did, but in what he might do. The unknown is always more frightening than the known. Our minds fill in the blanks with the worst possibilities, and that's what keeps us up at night. Or consider Mark, the man who heard the knock at his door every night at 2 a.m. He never saw who or what was knocking. The fear came from the persistence, the routine, the sense that something out there knew exactly where he was and exactly when to come calling. It's the fear of being watched, of being chosen, of being singled out by something you can't see. Sarah's story with the locked room is a classic example of forbidden knowledge. There's a reason so many horror stories revolve around locked doors, hidden rooms, and secrets best left alone. We're curious by nature, drawn to the things we're told to avoid. But sometimes curiosity comes with a price. Sometimes the things we find are better left undiscovered. Jamie and Alex, haunted by the watcher at the window, remind us that not all threats are loud or violent. Sometimes the scariest thing is the silent observer, the one who never blinks, never moves, never leaves, the one who just watches. It's a violation of privacy, a reminder that our homes are never as secure as we think. And David, with the rattling doorknob and the note slipped under his door, shows us how fear can become a part of daily life. It's not just about one bad night. It's about the slow erosion of safety, the way a single event can change the way you see your home, your routine, your sense of control. It's about the realization that sometimes the only thing keeping you safe is your own vigilance, and that even that might not be enough. But these stories aren't just about fear. They're about survival. They're about the choices we make when we're afraid, the instincts that kick in when something feels wrong. They're about listening to that little voice in the back of your mind that says, "Lock the door. Don't open it. Don't look." They're about trusting yourself, even when everyone else tells you it's nothing. There's a reason these stories have been told and retold in different forms for generations. They're cautionary tales, reminders that the world is full of dangers we can't always see. They teach us to be careful, to be aware, to respect the boundaries between ourselves and the unknown. They remind us that sometimes the best thing you can do is lock your door and wait for morning. But there's another side to these stories too, a side that's less about fear and more about connection. When we share these stories around a campfire, at a sleepover, or through a screen late at night, we're not just scaring each other. We're building a sense of community, a shared understanding that we're all vulnerable, all afraid of the same things. We're saying, "You're not alone. I felt it too." That's the real power of a good scary story. It doesn't just make you afraid. It makes you feel seen. It taps into the universal fears we all carry, the ones we don't always talk about. The fear of being alone. The fear of being watched. The fear of something waiting for us in the dark. And sometimes those fears are justified. Sometimes the world really is a dangerous place. Sometimes the locks on our doors are the only thing standing between us and something we can't understand. But most of the time, the things we're afraid of are just shadows, just stories, just the product of an overactive imagination. Still, it doesn't hurt to be careful. It doesn't hurt to check the locks one more time, to close the curtains, to listen for the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Because you never know. Maybe tonight is just another ordinary night. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the night when the story becomes real. So, as you listen to these stories, remember, they're not just meant to scare you. They're meant to remind you to be careful, to trust your instincts, to respect the boundaries between yourself and the unknown. And if you find yourself lying awake tonight, listening to the sounds of the house settling, wondering if you locked the door, well, maybe that's not such a bad thing, after all. It's better to be safe than sorry. There's a strange comfort in the rituals we perform before bed. The way we check the locks, peek out the window, make sure the curtains are drawn tight. We tell ourselves it's just routine, just a way to wind down after a long day. But deep down, we know it's more than that. It's a way of drawing a line between ourselves and the darkness outside. A way of saying, not tonight, not here. But what happens when the darkness doesn't respect those boundaries? What happens when the things we fear find a way in, no matter how many times we check the locks? Let's go back to Emily's story for a moment. After that night, the night she heard the footsteps stop outside her door, she couldn't sleep. Every creak, every groan of the old house set her nerves on edge. She started sleeping with the lights on, the bat within arm's reach. Her parents tried to reassure her, telling her it was just her imagination, that she was safe. But Emily knew what she'd heard. She knew what she'd felt. And she knew that, whatever it was still out there. A week later, it happened again. This time, the footsteps didn't stop at her door. They moved past, down the hall toward her parents' room. Emily lay frozen, listening as the sound faded into silence. The next morning, her parents were fine. No sign that anything had happened. But Emily noticed something strange. The family dog, usually so eager to greet her in the morning, was hiding under the bed, trembling. She wouldn't come out for hours. That was the last time Emily heard the footsteps. But she never forgot the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. She never forgot the way the house felt different after dark, as if something was waiting just beyond the edge of the light. Years later, she still checks the locks every night, still keeps a bat by her bed. She tells herself it's just a habit, but she knows better. Mark's story took a different turn. After weeks of nightly knocks and whispered pleas, he decided to confront whatever was haunting him. One night, when the knocking started, he opened the door wide and stepped into the hallway. It was empty, as always, but this time he didn't go back inside. He stood there, waiting, daring the visitor to show itself. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, at the far end of the hall, he saw a shadow move, a flicker of darkness just out of sight. He called out, demanding to know who was there. The shadow didn't answer. It just stood there watching. Mark felt a chill run down his spine, but he refused to back down. He stood his ground, staring into the darkness until the shadow finally melted away. After that night, the knocking stopped. Mark never saw the shadow again. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been tested, that he'd passed some kind of trial. He moved out a few months later, but he never forgot the lesson he'd learned. Sometimes, the only way to face your fears is to confront them head-on. Sarah's story, with the locked room, ended in a way she never expected. After the night she found her daughter standing at the end of the hall, she decided to get rid of the door altogether. She hired a contractor to remove it, to seal off the room for good. When they opened the door, they found nothing but dust and cobwebs. But as they tore down the wall, they discovered something strange. A small, child-sized handprint pressed into the plaster, as if someone or something had been trying to get out. Sarah moved her family out of the house soon after. She never told her daughter what they'd found. She didn't want to scare her, didn't want to give the darkness any more power than it already had. But sometimes, late at night, she wonders what would have happened if they'd left the door alone, if they'd ignored the scratching, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. She wonders if some doors are meant to stay closed, no matter how curious we are. Jamie and Alex, haunted by the watcher at the window, eventually found peace in a new home, far from the shadows of their old neighborhood. But the memory of those nights never left them. They became more cautious, more aware of their surroundings. They installed security cameras, motion lights, and reinforced locks on every door and window. They learned to trust their instincts, to listen to the little voice that says, "Something isn't right." And they never forgot the lesson they'd learned. Sometimes, the scariest things are the ones that don't try to get in, the ones that just watch and wait. David, with the rattling doorknob and the note slipped under his door, eventually moved out of the old apartment building. He found a new place, in a safer neighborhood, with better locks and thicker walls. But the fear never really left him. He still wakes up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced he hears someone trying the handle. He still checks the locks, still wedges a chair under the doorknob, still sleeps with a knife under his pillow. He knows it's probably just paranoia, just the lingering effects of a bad experience. But he also knows that sometimes the things we fear are real. Sometimes the only thing standing between us and the darkness is a locked door. Fear is a strange thing. It can be a warning, a survival instinct, a way of keeping us safe. But it can also be a prison, trapping us in routines and rituals that make us feel secure, even when we know deep down that safety is an illusion. The stories you've heard tonight are about more than just things that go bump in the night. They're about the ways we try to control the uncontrollable, to draw boundaries between ourselves and the unknown. But sometimes those boundaries are thinner than we think. Let's look a little deeper at what makes these stories so unsettling. It's not just the idea of an intruder or a ghost or a monster lurking in the shadows. It's the way the ordinary becomes strange, the way the familiar becomes threatening. A hallway, a window, a locked door, these are things we see every day, things we trust to keep us safe. But in these stories, they become gateways to something else, something we can't explain. Take the hallway in Emily's house. During the day, it's just a hallway, a place to walk from one room to another, a space filled with light and laughter. But at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows grow long, it becomes something else. It becomes a place where anything could be waiting, just out of sight. The same is true of Mark's apartment door, Sarah's locked room, Jamie and Alex's window, David's rattling doorknob. These are all symbols of safety, of separation between inside and outside, self and other. But in these stories, those symbols are turned upside down. There's a reason so many horror stories revolve around the home. It's supposed to be the one place where we're safe, where we can let our guard down. When that safety is threatened, it shakes us to our core. It makes us question everything we thought we knew about the world. If we can't be safe in our own homes, where can we be safe? But there's another layer to these stories, one that's even more unsettling. It's the idea that sometimes the danger isn't outside at all. Sometimes it's already inside. Sometimes the things we're afraid of are a part of us, our fears, our doubts, our secrets. The locked room in Sarah's house wasn't just a physical space. It was a symbol of the things we try to hide, the parts of ourselves we're afraid to face. The watcher at Jamie and Alex's window wasn't just a stranger. It was a reflection of their own vulnerability, their own fear of being seen. That's what makes these stories so powerful. They're not just about external threats. They're about the internal battles we all fight, the ways we try to protect ourselves from the things we can't control. They're about the masks we wear, the walls we build, the doors we lock, not just to keep the world out, but to keep ourselves in. But even the best locks can't keep everything out. Sometimes the things we fear find a way in, no matter how careful we are. Sometimes the boundaries we draw are just lines in the sand, easily washed away by the tide. And sometimes the only thing we can do is face our fears head-on, to confront the darkness and hope that we're strong enough to survive. That's the real lesson of these stories. Not that we should live in fear, but that we should be aware, vigilant, ready to act when something feels wrong. It's about trusting our instincts, listening to that little voice that says, something isn't right. It's about being willing to confront the things that scare us, even when we'd rather hide. But it's also about hope, because for every story of fear and danger, there's a story of survival, of resilience, of people who faced the darkness and came out the other side. Emily, Mark, Sarah, Jamie, Alex, David, they all found a way to keep going, to reclaim their sense of safety, to rebuild their lives. They didn't let fear control them. They learned from it, grew stronger because of it. And that's something we can all take to heart. No matter how scary the world may seem, no matter how many times we have to check the locks or close the curtains, we're not powerless. We have the ability to protect ourselves, to make choices, to draw boundaries. We have the strength to face our fears, to confront the unknown, to survive whatever comes our way. So, tonight, as you get ready for bed, remember these stories. Remember the lessons they teach. Check your locks, close your windows, draw the curtains. But don't let fear control you. Let it remind you to be careful, to be aware, to trust yourself. And if you ever find yourself lying awake, listening to the sounds of the night, wondering if you're really alone, remember that you're not. We all share the same fears, the same hopes, the same desire to be safe. And sometimes that's enough. As the night deepens and the world outside grows quiet, our senses sharpen. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind against the window, every distant siren or bark of a dog seems amplified. It's in these moments, when the familiar becomes strange, that our minds begin to wander. We remember stories we've heard, stories like the ones you've just listened to. Stories that make us question what's real and what's just our imagination. But sometimes, the line between the two isn't as clear as we'd like to believe. Let's revisit the idea of the ordinary turned sinister. It's easy to dismiss these stories as just that, stories. But for the people who lived them, the fear was real. The sense of violation, of being watched, of not being safe in your own home, can leave scars that last a lifetime. Emily still checks her locks every night, years after the footsteps stopped. Mark still avoids hallways late at night, still feels a chill when he hears a knock at the door. Sarah's daughter still wakes up from nightmares about the locked room, even though they moved away long ago. Jamie and Alex still flinch at the sight of a face in a window, even if it's just their own reflection. David still sleeps with a knife under his pillow, just in case. These are the lasting effects of fear. They shape the way we see the world, the way we move through it. They remind us that safety is never guaranteed, that the things we take for granted can be taken from us in an instant. But they also remind us of our resilience, our ability to adapt, to survive, to find new ways to feel safe. There's a reason these stories resonate with so many people. They tap into universal fears, the fear of the unknown, the fear of being alone, the fear of losing control. But they also tap into universal hopes, the hope that we can protect ourselves, that we can outsmart the things that scare us, that we can find safety even in the darkest of nights. It's no coincidence that so many cultures have their own versions of these stories. The details may change, the setting, the characters, the specific threat, but the core remains the same. There's always something out there, something just beyond the edge of the light waiting for us to let our guard down. There's always a door that shouldn't be opened, a window that shouldn't be looked through, a sound that shouldn't be ignored. But there's also always a hero, someone who faces the darkness, who refuses to be a victim, who finds a way to survive. Sometimes the hero is the person who locks the door and waits for morning. Sometimes it's the person who confronts the shadow in the hallway, or the face at the window, or the thing behind the locked door. Sometimes it's the person who simply refuses to give in to fear, who keeps going even when every instinct says to run. That's what makes these stories so compelling. They're not just about the things that scare us. They're about the ways we fight back, the ways we reclaim our power, the ways we refuse to let fear define us. They're about the choices we make, the boundaries we draw, the courage we find in the face of the unknown, but courage doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it's as simple as checking the locks one more time, or calling a friend when you're scared, or admitting that you're afraid. Sometimes it's about asking for help, about trusting others to keep you safe. Sometimes it's about letting go of the need to control everything, and accepting that some things are beyond our understanding. And sometimes it's about telling your story, about sharing your fears, your experiences, your survival. Because when we share our stories, we remind each other that we're not alone. We create a community, a network of people who understand what it's like to be afraid, who know what it's like to face the darkness and come out the other side. So, if you've ever felt the chill of fear late at night, if you've ever checked the locks one more time before bed, if you've ever wondered what might be waiting just outside your door, know that you're not alone. Know that there are others who have felt the same way, who have faced the same fears, who have survived the same darkness, and know that no matter how scary the world may seem, you have the strength to face it. You have the power to protect yourself, to draw boundaries, to reclaim your sense of safety. You have the courage to survive, to adapt, to keep going, no matter what. So tonight, as you listen to the sounds of the house settling, as you check the locks and close the curtains, remember these stories. Remember the lessons they teach. And remember that, sometimes, the only thing standing between you and the darkness is your own courage. There's a peculiar intimacy to fear, especially the kind that creeps in during the quiet hours of the night. It's a feeling that strips away pretense, that makes us honest with ourselves in ways we rarely are during the day. In the darkness, we admit to the things that unsettle us, the memories that linger, the stories that refuse to fade. And in that honesty, we find a strange kind of connection, not just to our own fears, but to everyone who's ever felt the same chill, the same uncertainty, the same need to lock the door and keep the world at bay. Think about the rituals you perform before bed. Maybe you check the locks, not once, but twice. Maybe you leave a light on in the hallway just in case. Maybe you keep your phone within reach, or a heavy object by your bedside, or a pet curled up at your feet. These rituals are more than just habits. They're talismans, small acts of defiance against the unknown. They're ways of telling ourselves that we have some control, that we can keep the darkness at bay, even if only for a little while. But what happens when those rituals fail? What happens when the thing you're afraid of finds a way in, despite your best efforts? That's the question at the heart of every scary story, every urban legend, every whispered warning passed down through generations. It's the question that keeps us up at night, that makes us listen for footsteps in the hallway, that makes us wonder if we really are alone. Emily's story, with the footsteps in the hallway, is a perfect example. She did everything right, locked the doors, kept a bat by her bed, trusted her instincts. But still, something found its way in. Still, she felt the presence just outside her door, waiting, watching. It's a reminder that sometimes fear isn't about what we do or don't do. Sometimes it's about the things we can't control, the things that slip through the cracks no matter how careful we are. Mark's story, with the nightly knocking, is another kind of fear, the fear of being chosen, of being singled out by something you can't see or understand. He tried to ignore it, tried to confront it, tried to outlast it. But the fear lingered, long after the knocking stopped. It became a part of him, a shadow that followed him from one apartment to the next, a reminder that some things can't be left behind. Sarah's locked room is the fear of the unknown, the fear of secrets and mysteries and things best left undiscovered. She tried to protect her family, tried to keep the darkness at bay. But in the end, the only way to be free was to face the truth, to open the door and see what was inside. It's a lesson we all have to learn sooner or later, that sometimes the only way to conquer our fears is to confront them head on. Jamie and Alex's watcher at the window is the fear of being seen, of being vulnerable, of having your private world invaded by something you can't understand. They tried to hide, tried to protect themselves, tried to escape. But the memory of those eyes watching from the darkness never really left them. It's a fear that lingers, that shapes the way you see the world, that makes you question every shadow, every reflection, every flicker of movement outside your window. And David's rattling doorknob is the fear of intrusion, the fear that no matter how many locks you turn, no matter how many precautions you take, you're never really safe. He moved, he changed his routines, he tried to start over, but the fear followed him, a constant companion, a reminder that safety is never guaranteed. These stories are powerful not just because they scare us, but because they make us feel seen. They remind us that we're not alone in our fears, that everyone has something that keeps them up at night, something they check the locks against. They create a sense of community, a shared understanding that fear is a part of being human. But they also remind us of our strength. For every story of fear, there's a story of survival, of resilience, of people who faced the darkness and found a way to keep going. Emily, Mark, Sarah, Jamie, Alex, David, they all found ways to reclaim their lives, to rebuild their sense of safety, to move forward. They didn't let fear define them. They learned from it, grew stronger because of it. And that's the real lesson of these stories. Not that we should live in fear, but that we should respect it, learn from it, use it to make ourselves stronger. Fear is a warning, a guide, a reminder to be careful, to trust our instincts, to protect ourselves and the people we love. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be acknowledged, understood, and, when the time comes, faced with courage. So, tonight, as you check the locks and close the curtains, remember these stories. Remember the people who faced their fears and survived. And remember that you have the strength to do the same. There's a reason the oldest stories in the world are about things that go bump in the night. Long before electricity, before cities, before the comfort of neighbors just a wall away, people gathered around fires and told tales of the things lurking in the darkness. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were warnings, lessons, ways to make sense of a world that was often unpredictable and dangerous. And even now, in a world of smart locks and security cameras, those old fears still find a way to reach us. Maybe that's why, when you hear a strange noise at night, your heart skips a beat. Maybe that's why, even though you know it's probably nothing, you get up to check the locks one more time. It's not just superstition, it's survival. It's the part of you that remembers, deep down, that the world isn't always safe, that sometimes the things we fear are real. But there's another side to these stories, one that's easy to overlook. It's the way they bring us together, the way they create a sense of shared experience. When you tell someone about the footsteps you heard in the hallway, or the face you saw at the window, or the knock at the door that made your blood run cold, you're not just sharing a story. You're reaching out, looking for connection, for understanding, for reassurance that you're not alone. And you're not. For every person who's ever felt afraid in the dark, there's someone else who's felt the same way. For every story of fear, there's a story of comfort. A friend who stays on the phone with you until you fall asleep. A neighbor who checks your locks. A pet who curls up beside you and chases the nightmares away. These are the things that make us human. The things that remind us that, even in the darkest of nights, we're never truly alone. But what about the stories that don't have a comforting ending? What about the ones that linger, that haunt us, that make us question what's real and what's just our imagination? Those are the stories that stick with us, the ones we can't quite explain, the ones that make us wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's more to the world than we can see. Take Emily, for example. Years after the footsteps stopped, she still finds herself listening for them, still feels a chill when she walks down the hallway at night. She's moved on, built a life, found new routines and new comforts, but the memory of that night, the sense of being watched, of being hunted, never really left her. It's a part of her now, a reminder to be careful, to trust her instincts, to respect the boundaries between herself and the unknown. Or Mark, who still avoids hallways late at night, who still feels a shiver when he hears a knock at the door. He's learned to live with his fear, to use it as a guide rather than a prison. He's found ways to feel safe, to reclaim his sense of control. But he knows, deep down, that the world is full of mysteries, that not everything can be explained or understood. Sarah, who faced the locked room and found only dust and shadows, still wonders what might have happened if she'd left the door alone. She's learned to accept that some questions don't have answers, that some mysteries are better left unsolved. But she also knows that curiosity is a powerful thing, that sometimes the only way to be free is to face the things we fear most. Jamie and Alex, who moved far away from the watcher at the window, have built a new life, a new sense of safety. But the memory of those eyes, watching from the darkness, is never far from their minds. They've learned to trust their instincts, to listen to the little voice that says, "Something isn't right." They've learned that safety isn't just about locks and alarms. It's about awareness, about vigilance, about trusting yourself to know when something is wrong. And David, who still sleeps with a knife under his pillow, has learned that fear doesn't just go away. It changes you, shapes you, becomes a part of who you are. But it doesn't have to control you. It can make you stronger, more aware, more prepared for whatever comes next. These stories aren't just about fear. They're about survival, about resilience, about the ways we adapt to a world that's often unpredictable and dangerous. They're about the choices we make, the boundaries we draw, the courage we find in the face of the unknown. And they're about hope. Because for every story of fear, there's a story of survival, of people who faced the darkness and found a way to keep going. There's a story of someone who checked the locks, who trusted their instincts, who refused to let fear define them. So tonight, as you listen to the sounds of the house settling, as you check the locks and close the curtains, remember these stories. Remember that you're not alone, that your fears are shared by countless others, that you have the strength to face whatever comes your way. As the hours slip by and the world outside your window grows even quieter, you might find yourself thinking about the stories you've heard tonight. Maybe you're replaying the details in your mind, the footsteps in the hallway, the face at the window, the persistent knock at the door. Maybe you're wondering if you'd react the same way as Emily, Mark, Sarah, Jamie, Alex, or David. Would you freeze in fear, or would you confront the unknown? Would you trust your instincts, or would you try to rationalize what's happening, telling yourself it's just the wind, just the house settling, just your imagination? That's the thing about fear, it's unpredictable. It doesn't always make sense, and it doesn't always follow the rules. Sometimes it's a sudden jolt, a rush of adrenaline that makes you act without thinking. Other times, it's a slow, creeping dread that settles in your bones, making you second-guess every sound, every shadow, every flicker of movement in the corner of your eye. And sometimes it's both, a moment of panic followed by hours of unease, a story you can't quite shake. But fear isn't just about what happens in the moment. It's about what comes after, the way it lingers, the way it changes you. After a scare, you might find yourself developing new habits, new rituals, new ways of keeping yourself safe. You might start checking the locks more often, leaving a light on in the hallway, avoiding certain places or situations that remind you of what happened. You might find yourself telling the story to others, looking for reassurance, for understanding, for a way to make sense of what you experienced. And in that sharing, something important happens. The story becomes more than just a memory. It becomes a lesson, a warning, a way of connecting with others who felt the same fear. It becomes a part of the collective wisdom we pass down, from one generation to the next, about how to survive in a world that's often unpredictable and dangerous. That's why these stories matter. They're not just entertainment, not just a way to pass the time on a dark night. They're a way of making sense of the world, of understanding our own fears, of finding comfort in the knowledge that we're not alone. They remind us that fear is a part of being human, that it's something we all experience, no matter how brave or strong we might seem, but they also remind us of our resilience, our ability to adapt, to survive, to find new ways to feel safe. For every story of fear, there's a story of hope, a story of someone who faced the darkness and found a way to keep going, a story of someone who checked the locks, who trusted their instincts, who refused to let fear control their life. So, as you lie in bed tonight, listening to the sounds of the house settling, remember that you're not alone. Remember that your fears are shared by countless others, that you have the strength to face whatever comes your way. Remember that the stories you tell and the stories you hear are a way of connecting with others, of building a community, of finding comfort in the darkness. And if you find yourself feeling afraid, if you hear a strange noise or see a shadow where there shouldn't be one, don't be ashamed. Don't try to hide your fear or pretend it doesn't exist. Acknowledge it, respect it, use it as a guide. Let it remind you to be careful, to trust your instincts, to protect yourself and the people you love. Because in the end, that's what these stories are really about. They're about the choices we make, the boundaries we draw, the courage we find in the face of the unknown. They're about the ways we adapt, the ways we survive, the ways we keep going, even when the world feels dark and dangerous. And they're about hope. Hope that no matter how scary the world may seem, we have the strength to face it. Hope that no matter how many times we have to check the locks or close the curtains, we're not powerless. Hope that even in the darkest of nights, we're never truly alone. So tonight, as you get ready for bed, take a moment to appreciate the rituals that make you feel safe. Check the locks, close the windows, draw the curtains. And remember that sometimes the only thing standing between you and the darkness is your own courage. And now, as the last story fades and the night settles in, you might find yourself thinking about the thin line between the world you know and the world you fear. Maybe you're lying in bed, the glow of your phone screen the only light in the room, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Maybe you're replaying the stories in your mind, wondering if you'd recognize the signs, if you'd know when to trust your instincts, if you'd have the courage to act when it mattered most. There's a reason these stories linger, a reason they echo in the back of your mind long after the telling is done. It's not just the details, the footsteps, the faces, the knocks at the door. It's the feeling they leave behind, the sense that the world is bigger and stranger than you thought, that there are mysteries just beyond the edge of the light, waiting to be discovered. It's the realization that, for all our technology and security and routines, we're still vulnerable, still human, still afraid of the things we can't see. But that fear isn't just a weakness, it's a strength too. It's what keeps us alert, what makes us careful, what drives us to protect ourselves and the people we love. It's what connects us to each other, across time and distance and experience. When you tell someone about the thing that scared you, you're not just sharing a story, you're reaching out, looking for understanding, for comfort, for a reminder that you're not alone. And you're not. The stories you've heard tonight are proof of that. They're reminders that everyone, no matter how brave or confident they seem, has felt afraid. Everyone has checked the locks one more time, listened for footsteps in the dark, wondered if the thing they fear is real. Everyone has faced a moment when the world felt unfamiliar, when the ordinary became strange, when the safe became dangerous. But everyone has also survived. Everyone has found a way to keep going, to adapt, to reclaim their sense of safety. Everyone has learned in their own way how to live with fear, how to use it as a guide, a warning, a source of strength. That's the real power of these stories. Not that they scare us, but that they remind us of our resilience, our adaptability, our courage. So, as you lie in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the night, remember that you're part of a long tradition. You're part of a community of survivors, of storytellers, of people who have faced the unknown and found a way to keep going. You're not alone, no matter how quiet the world may seem. And if you ever find yourself afraid, if you hear a noise you can't explain, or see a shadow where there shouldn't be one, or feel a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature, don't be ashamed. Don't try to hide your fear or pretend it doesn't exist. Acknowledge it. Respect it. Use it to make yourself stronger, more aware, more prepared for whatever comes next. Because fear, in the end, is just another part of being alive. It's a reminder that you care, that you want to be safe, that you have something worth protecting. It's a sign that you're paying attention, that you're engaged with the world, that you're willing to face the things that scare you, and that's something to be proud of. So, tonight, as you turn off the lights and settle into bed, Take a moment to appreciate the rituals that make you feel safe. Check the locks, close the windows, draw the curtains. Listen to the quiet, to the heartbeat of the house, to the stories that linger in the darkness. And remember that, no matter what happens, you have the strength to face it. You have the courage to survive, the wisdom to trust your instincts, the resilience to keep going. And if you ever need a reminder, if you ever feel alone or afraid, come back to these stories. Let them remind you that you're not alone, that your fears are shared, that your courage is real. Let them remind you that, even in the darkest of nights, there is hope, hope that you can face whatever comes, hope that you can find safety, hope that you can build a life in spite of the darkness. Because in the end, that's what these stories are really about. They're about the choices we make, the boundaries we draw, the courage we find in the face of the unknown. They're about the ways we adapt, the ways we survive, the ways we keep going, even when the world feels dark and dangerous. And they're about hope. Hope that no matter how scary the world may seem, we have the strength to face it. Hope that no matter how many times we have to check the locks or close the curtains, we're not powerless. Hope that even in the darkest of nights, we're never truly alone. So tonight, as you get ready for bed, take a moment to appreciate the rituals that make you feel safe. Check the locks, close the windows, draw the curtains. And remember that sometimes the only thing standing between you and the darkness is your own courage. Sleep well. And don't forget to lock your doors.